Hello, everybody. It's so great to be here. Thank you so much. Thank you, Cognition Next. We're so excited to be here and streaming live into your homes and talking to you about a really important topic today, the power of virtual reality to create, connect, to collaborate, and to learn. And we have some great guests that are going to join me. A little bit of intro. I am with HP. HP has been founded 81 years ago. This is our 81st anniversary. And we're credited as being the founding company of Silicon Valley. Our two founders created HP in a garage, creating technology for Walt Disney for the movie Fantasia. And so we've had an amazing history since then, inventing and reinventing the future and technology, and continuing to focus on and use technology to empower us, to enable us, and really help live our lives. And particularly now, in this moment, of digital work life. How are we living? How are we playing? How are we working? It all is coming together. And so HP has been highly focused on that. And, in particular, we see virtual reality and immersive computing and AI and some of the other big breakthrough technologies that are being discussed today and this week at this great conference as the future of computing. And so for us, it's incredibly important that we're focused on building and creating that future. And, when we look at what's happening today, we see that the time for VR is now. We see all the trends pointing to acceleration of virtual reality and acceleration of the importance. And why is that? Well, we see that virtual reality enables us to learn, and at a time where nearly 90% of all students are not in schools, being able to learn through tools and technologies in ways that really increase retention, increase engagement, such as virtual reality, are very important. Right now, we see VR not only empowering students through learning, but also in our workforces. 25 to 30% of employees think that they'll be working from home at least part of the time through 2021. So being able to come together and both collaborate and learn with virtual reality creates increased productivity and efficiency. Virtual reality enables us to create, and we have some guests who are going to really be able to talk to that today as well. One of our partners, McKinsey, and I know McKinsey has somebody on the panel, on one of the panels here today. The head of XR has said, if you enable your employees with a computer, a mouse, a screen, and a keyboard, but not a virtual reality headset, you're essentially hobbling their productivity. And so what we have some of our panelists here who will talk about how the productivity has been enhanced by using virtual reality in their companies and with their clients and partners. And virtual reality enables us to connect and to collaborate. It's certainly been seen as very strong in gaming. We have all-time concurrent users at an all-time high for our partner Steam VR and Valve, and so we're seeing that connection being accelerated even more than ever. And then we're seeing also on the collaboration side, we're seeing that even on our own teams, we're connecting with virtual reality to have team meetings, to do presentations, to maybe even do product design for some of the new products that we just launched. We actually just announced our new virtual reality headset, HP Reverb Generation 2, last week. And so, some of the product design conversations, quality conversations were created and had in virtual reality. We've even had, this is the time where we're not able to do our water cooler the way we normally would, and have those connections with teammates. And so we get together and we've done a retirement party for one of our teammates. We've gotten together to play basketball and dodgeball and done so many amazing things in virtual reality. And so today I welcome my co-panelists. We have a great group, each one with amazing expertise, a long list of awards, a long list of accomplishments. And so I'd like to invite Carrie, Courtney, and Shay to join me, and we'll get started with our conversation. Thank you all for being here. I really appreciate your time. Thank you for joining this this virtual panel with at this esteemed conference with so many great speakers. Let's start by just doing quick introductions about the work that you're doing in virtual reality. Courtney, why don't you go first?
Hi, everyone. I'm delighted to be here with you. So I'm a professor at Columbia University. I work in VR to try and explore ways that we can immerse people in experiences that are very different from their own, in some ways pushing against the narrative of empathy to try and move people to think and act differently. So I created a piece called A Thousand Cut Journey that immerses you in the experience of a Black male as a child, an adolescent, and as an adult experiencing racism in different forms, in different contexts. And as a psychologist, I'm interested in what effect I'm having on people when I put them through an experience like that. So in addition to running several empirical studies to examine the effects of that experience, we're working with schools and corporations to think about the use of this tool for learning and training, both in classrooms as well as in corporate environments. And I'm also working on new work that's also exploring how to integrate data visualization into complex narratives in VR. So how do we take empirical data that we have around complex social issues like inequitable transmission of COVID or police violence and defunding police? How do we really understand those complex issues, leveraging the power of VR? So I'll leave it there, and I'm happy to be a part of the conversation today.
Great, thank you. Carrie, you introduced yourself.
Hi, everybody. I'm Carrie Shaw. I am the CEO and founder of Embodied Labs, and Embodied Labs is an immersive training platform for caregivers. So for people that are caring for older adults, whether that's in a professional setting like a senior care living community or with our municipal governments, the divisions of adult protective services, or even corporations that, for example, have a call center that serves all older adults in their customer base. And what we do with our experiences is we have a platform of trainings that combine 360 live action film and gaming elements. You use your voice, your hands that are projected as who you're embodying in the training. And you're able to do things like go inside the brain and understand Alzheimer's disease from being in the body, but then actually go into someone's lived experience as they're going through early, middle, and late stages of Alzheimer's disease. So we really pair the brain health and the actual first-person perspectives of different people that are living with things that impact us as we age. We also give opportunities for role playing. So then once you go through, say, an end of life situation where you're dealing with a terminal diagnosis, how do you as a caregiver approach having a difficult conversation with a family member or a loved one? We've created trainings that deal with embodying someone with our most common vision and hearing impairments like macular degeneration and hearing loss, what it's like to be in situations where you're also approaching different races and cultures as they deal with common care situations. So being a Latino woman who's experiencing Alzheimer's disease, embodying a veteran with a terminal cancer diagnosis, embodying a Lebanese American woman who's making a transition from living at home to going to a community as she deals with her Parkinson's and Lewy body dementia. So we take an approach to focusing on how to empower people that are caring for older adults through taking on different perspective narratives in an immersive setting in order to more effectively train us to give better care and service.
Great, thank you. Thank you. Shay, introduce yourself.
Yeah, hey there. My name is Sosanya. I'm co-founder and CEO of Gravity Sketch. And here at Gravity Sketch, we're creating a 3D design platform for designers, engineers to essentially get on the same page, designing immersively in a 3D environment. And so through this, they can actually streamline their productivity and workflow. A lot of the critical conversations that need to happen during the production or design of a product actually need to happen very early on, because those downstream effects could kind of surmount as the project moves forward if you miss something. So my background is in manufacturing and industrial design, and I've faced these challenges first time head on, and it's really just kind of frustrating. And from a human perspective, you know, the breakdown between engineer and designer, it really doesn't need to happen, because we have a common goal. We're trying to build a product, we're trying to launch a product, and we want that product to be successful. But the tools and methods that we use to discuss are not really fit for purpose. We should be talking about the 3D idea that we actually want to bring to market. So we've been working primarily with the automotive industry for the past 2 years here. And we have some great clients. The one client that we can talk publicly about is Ford, where they've been using our collaboration features and bringing in stakeholders at every level of a design of the project, at the very early aspects of the design, to kind of troubleshoot, and even bringing in like interior designers and exterior designers to talk about, you know, how that project may come to fruition, and how the product may look once it hits the road. So it's a pretty exciting time for us. It's like, you know, take your sketch into 3D, but then even go beyond that.
Excellent. So let's talk first. How do you all get started in this industry? Carrie, why don't you start?
Sure. Well, when I was in my teens, my mom got diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's disease. And then at one point in my mid-20s, I was living at home with her as her primary caregiver. And she started to really need more help than my dad and I could give. So I started to work and look for home health aides that could support my mom and her care, and realized that both for me and for her care team, we really had trouble understanding how to best care for my mom living with late stages of Alzheimer's. And there's this one, I actually brought my first prototype for what became Embodied Labs today, because my mom had this thing called a left visual field deficit. And I'd always try to explain to each person that was coming to work with us what that meant. And I would say, you know, it's not like she can't see out of her left eye. But I realized if I could just create it with goggles, then we could step into my mom's perspective and see what she was seeing, and intuit that if she was going to be able to see us approach, we'd have to come from the right, and she'd get startled if we came from the left, or why it was that we always had to protect this side of her body. And then at mealtime, she'd eat like exactly half of her plate of food. So these goggles helped me realize she couldn't see that half of her food, and we'd have to rotate the plate for her to finish her meal. And so these goggles kind of symbolize, like, I wanted to know so much more about what was going on when she was struggling to speak or hear what I was saying, or I could tell she was seeing the world in all these different ways. And, you know, going through something like Alzheimer's is so much more than just a physical impairment. And so I thought, what if there was a way we could step into someone's world and really understand their human experience in a more complex way, and then in doing so become more effective care partners. And so then fast forward a few years, and I was working on my master's in medical illustration, and asked this question as part of my research. And that's when I discovered VR. I had no idea what it was, but I discovered that through a headset, you could simulate anything you wanted. And then I began to learn about the science of immersive training and how much more effective it was, how much more retention you can gain from immersive training, and even how we can learn about different cultures and races and genders, and impact our socio-emotional learning. And that's what then became, unbeknownst to me at the time, the thesis was the groundwork for what's become, for the last 4.5 years, the work we've done at Embodied Labs.
Great, really inspiring. Thank you. How about you, Shay? How did you start getting involved?
Yeah, so my background's in mechanical engineering and industrial design. And there, when I was working abroad, I was working actually in Taiwan. And the design team and the engineering team often only spoke when it came time to make a prototype. And often the designers would speak with their beautiful sketches, like very nice perspective sketching, and engineers would come with their, you know, very clean orthographic views. And those never really matched up when it came to the final prototype. And so we ended up spinning our wheels a lot of times with the manufacturers, trying to get the just the right prototype made. And you know, what I felt was missing was this communication at every level of the design process and engineering process. And what I wanted to try to stimulate in those discussions with the designers and engineering team were, why don't we go to the factory and speak with the vendors? Why don't you guys come across the hall and speak with the design team before even starting the design process? And it just never really stuck. It was really hard to kind of change that internal culture of a designer and engineer. And so I came to London, and where I met Daniela, my co-founder, and she's coming from a very strong industrial design background. And she had a similar issue, like, why can't my prototypes ever come out exactly the way I want them to? And so this was our thesis work. How do we make a platform where people that are trying to develop an idea can communicate together, bring that idea out very early on, and have a very clear, transparent way of communicating? Because a sketch is a great way to communicate, but everyone's idea of perspective completely shifts once it's, kind of processing in the brain. So we don't really see anything in the brain in 2D. We see everything in 3D, but we use these tools to communicate into 3D. And so we felt that with the rise of augmented reality and virtual reality, this would be a great way to remove the screen or remove the two-dimensionality of that process to just ideate directly in 3D. And so this was our kind of foray into VR. And since then, it's been, hurdle after hurdle. Obviously, the industry has taken a little bit longer to pick up than what we initially thought. And so we spent some time working at Jaguar Land Rover, where we saw firsthand, and we tried to break down some of those gaps firsthand. And eventually, products became more affordable. And it's funny because it's targeted towards gaming, and it just reduces the price dramatically. So we started to see these VR headsets pop up in our studio, and we thought, okay, we should probably go full time on this thing, and we did so in 2017. And since then, we've been selling into the automotive industry and trying to help them really streamline that communication gap between design and engineering.
Great, thanks. Courtney, how about you? How did you?
I really backed into VR, but it really kind of grew out of a frustration with audiences, and I think particular white liberal audiences, not fully understanding and engaging issues of systemic racism, particularly in the US, although it's a global issue, and really feeling like the empirical data, the journalism that was being done in the space just wasn't quite landing in the way that those who worked in those spaces were hoping. So I wanted to try and find a way to put people in a face-to-face experience with racism in a way that they wouldn't be able to experience from that perspective in the real world, or that would be more complicated in trying to create. So I had never used VR at the time that I started this project, and even to the extreme of I had never even used a Google Cardboard headset. I had this idea that I wanted someone to be able to walk in someone else's shoes and have that experience, and reached out to my collaborators at Stanford, Jeremy Balinson at the Virtual Human Interaction Lab, to see if they would be interested in collaborating on this project, building on my background, focusing on racism in modern society and what that means and how we measure it and how we represent it, and building on Jeremy's long career, thinking about social and behavioral applications of VR. And that ended up being this really serendipitous kind of connection that was so fruitful, and really kind of spoke to the power of bringing people together who have different areas of expertise, different backgrounds, to try and create something together to create the piece that we made. And I went in again as a novice, but also a skeptic in some ways. People, I felt sometimes, and I think they still do, oversell what VR is doing without enough data around what we're actually doing. But now that I've been in the space longer, I've been creating in the space, I definitely see so much potential in what it can do. And I think the more that we bring people who are novices with the technology, people from various backgrounds, disciplinary, that don't have backgrounds on the technical side, but certainly have important perspective on a range of applications that we may not have even imagined yet. I think the more that we open up the space and make creation in the VR space more accessible, the more that we'll learn and discover the true possibilities of the technology.
Okay, thank you. So let's talk about some of you have mentioned this a little bit, but let's talk about who are your partners, who are your clients, and how are they using your platforms or your content? Carrie, why don't you start?
Sure. So our partners range from having about 75 different senior living organizations that use Embodied Labs today, They use them to train staff and also provide community outreach to family caregivers. We also have government, as I mentioned, adult protective services and offices on aging that use Embodied Labs to train their social work managers, their new and veteran staff. And then again, on the office on aging side, partner with community organizations to reach out to informal caregivers, people who are caring for someone in addition to doing their full-time work. And then one of our corporate partners that I can talk about is Best Buy Health, their senior care products division. So we train the call center employees that are answering the phones for older adults using products that Best Buy Health makes for this sector. And we've been able to look at how this training impacts their confidence and their job satisfaction and their performance in doing their job. We also have around 50 academic training institutions that have integrated Embodied Labs training into their health sciences programs, ranging from nursing to MD, PT, OT. Really all the allied health science programs are represented in our customer base. And that's been a really great way to start to see some peer-reviewed data come out about where this is really impacting the training for our up-and-coming healthcare workforce.
Thank you. How about you, Shay? You mentioned a couple of clients, and you talked about automotive a little bit, but we can talk a little bit more about exactly how those companies are using the platforms and what are some of the results from that?
Yeah, so we actually started with the community, and we started working by offering the product out there at a very reasonable price on Steam and some of the other platforms, because we couldn't just grab a company and say, hey, start using our product and give us feedback. We did that with a couple, but it didn't land so fast because you end up getting siloed into these little pockets of like innovation where they're not really doing the core work that we were trying to promote and support. So we let it out, and the community actually reacted quite positively. So we started up a Slack channel and then a Discord, and we really tried to uncover where our product would sit in that workflow. And I think we've been talking about it so far. It's really around empathy. How do I bring in the engineer, or how do I bring the designer and the engineer together so that we can properly talk about this concept before we decide to, attribute a certain amount of resources towards the project. And if we talk about automotive specifically, when you move from pen and paper sketching in Photoshop to making a mock-up of even a quarter-scale clay model, you're making a pretty big financial investment. And really what those designers need to do is they just need to see that from their perspective in 3D, and they need to understand where the limitations are. So the engineer should be able to tell them, okay, actually you need to pull the wheel arch out a little bit, or we're gonna actually change the wheelbase. And so some of those critical conversations can't be made until you have something physical, 3D. And with virtual reality, you're able to go up to one-to-one scale at a sketch level. So you're able to like sit down in a seat, and you can draw out the whole dashboard, the whole driving experience, the line of vision, the door handle, all of that, at a very kind of, I don't know, it's like cheaper than pen and paper in a lot of ways. Once you get it all set up, of course. So that's been the way that we've kind of gone to market, and it's kind of working with the community, and the community helping us understand where the product is fit for purpose. And then a lot of these people in the community are actually professional designers, because design is not a 9-to-5 gig. People don't really jump into design to become rich and wealthy. They jump into design because they're passionate about it. So they're thinking about it 24/7. They go home, they'll buy a gaming PC and a VR headset just to try something that can unleash their creativity. And we want to harness that and really feed that, as well as learn from that, so we can help these companies move faster and build better products, but just help have a much more enjoyable workplace, to be honest.
Great. So the section that we're in this conference is called Lab to Live, Real World Lessons and Best Practice Examples. So let's talk about your work getting out in the world, the platforms, the content, and what were some of the learnings? Courtney, I know that you premiered at Tribeca Film Festival, and it's a project to other places as well. What are some of the things that came out of showing the project to people, and what are some of the learnings that you've taken from that?
Yeah, I think we've learned so much from having thousands of people go through it at this point. And I think have been encouraged that it's having the effect that we hoped it would have. So if you think about a piece like this that's tackling such an emotionally charged, complex social issue, and you're putting someone in a headset to go through an emotionally charged, complex experience, I wasn't sure how people were going to react when they came out of the headset. But what I'm finding is that, one, who's most inclined to put on the headset are the people who I thought would put on the headset, or people who are liberal leaning, liberal identified, want to talk and think about these issues to some degree, but are coming out of the headset consistently saying that they're understanding and connecting with issues of racism in a way that they haven't before. And I think after the Tribeca Film Festival in 2018, what became very clear to us is that this really had the potential to be a learning tool. So the experience in the headset is not a magic pill. It's not that you're going to get all that you need just by going through this 12-minute experience. But if you have a meaningful conversation after, if it's being used in a classroom, if it's being used as part of a corporate training, for instance, the ability to translate the emotion that comes out of going through the experience in the headset, I think becomes quite powerful. So we've been using it in higher ed classrooms at the graduate and undergraduate levels at different institutions, working in medical schools and law firms to think about how do we help people really frame and understand issues of racism in a way that informs the way they should be moving forward. That's not an overly simplified focus on bias necessarily, but you're really thinking about systems and structures and cultures, and how can VR be useful in helping us do that. And if you think about this moment that we're in, the protests are global, but really the catalyst are instances of police violence and vigilante related deaths in the U.S. It shouldn't take seeing a public lynching essentially for you to care and notice these issues. How might we leverage technology to help people connect and start to understand the complexities of the societies that we live in without relying on someone's death to be the charge by which you move forward? So we're trying to use VR to speed up the ways in which people are connecting with the significance of these issues. And I found that it's been quite effective, and I'm really encouraged about the possibilities.
Yeah, it's such important work. Thank you. Really important. And Carrie, how about you? What are some of the learnings that have come out of taking the product out in the world and having so many people work with it? What are some of the learnings? What are some of the metrics you look at? And how are you thinking towards the future?
Yeah, I'll talk a lot about our Alzheimer's focused training as an example. And so in this lab, you are walking through 3 different modules that focus on the early stages of Alzheimer's, the middle stages, and then the late. And you're both, as I mentioned before, understanding how the brain works in VR by actually being inside a brain, understanding what a healthy brain is like, and then how it's changing. And then you're in the perspective of someone going through early, middle, and late stages. So in the early phases, you're, for example, in a grocery store and you're following a grocery list and realizing that you're kind of struggling with where the words are on the list and how words like flowers and baking flour are similar. You're maybe still having Easter dinner with your family, but the cooking the meal is more difficult. You have to have a challenging conversation with your family to help explain what you've been struggling with. As you get into the middle stages of Alzheimer's, you start to notice that the way you hear language and actually how you speak is changing. So the words you think you're saying are coming out differently, and the words you're hearing around you are not quite making sense. Things like vision and spatial awareness change, and your sensitivity to noise changes. And so when we have people that are caring for older adults go through these trainings, oftentimes they come out and say, wow, I didn't know that all these different things are impacted by Alzheimer's disease. I thought it was just about, forgetting who someone was or having memory problems. So that's one of the top aha moments, is realizing that the whole brain is affected and a lot of things change, and they change over time. So in the earlier stages, you can still do so much as a person living with Alzheimer's, and we really try in our learning framework, which isn't just to be in VR, it's prepare, embody, reflect outside of VR and apply. And in that reflection time, people really can pull apart how to think about the person and not just their disease. And then we see some of the things that people change in how they care is they realize that never to talk about somebody when they're in the room. So in the VR experiences, you actually experience what it's like to have your care team and your family start to talk about you instead of with you. And so people come out and say, it made me so mad that I was sitting right there and someone was speaking for me. Or they say, I'm going to remember to turn on music and have a well-lit room so that when it's time to do something like shower or something that someone's feeling anxiety, these things can help them feel more comfortable. And we hear things like the care managers say that we start to see our staff just start changing their behaviors without them having to say anything. So that learning transfer happens immediately, kind of again with the goggles, where you feel it, you experience it, and you learn how to approach your care in a more effective way because of that. And then on the one outcome that I loved learning about when I went to visit one of our call center training sites was that one of the ways the trainers were using their reflection from these experiences was they were having each employee think about who was their what we call Beatrice. So all the labs are named after a person, and the one about Alzheimer's is the Beatrice lab. And they would think about in the experience if they identified with Beatrice maybe as their grandma, or maybe they identified with Beatrice's daughter in the experience, they would pull that person out and even in some cases keep a picture on their desk to help them remind them that when they're doing their work every day with older adults across the country, that they have someone in their life that they're connected to that's similar to that customer that they're serving.
That personal connection is really powerful. Very powerful. So Shay, so what are some of the more surprising user insights that you found, since launching that you weren't expecting and that you've learned with your partners and your client base?
Yeah, well, I mean, this has been a kind of a continuation of our thesis work. So every day I'm pretty blown away by some of the stuff that people are doing in the platform. But one thing working with some of these bigger automotive companies that has been surprising to me is that, well, in a way it's been surprising, and I guess we could have assumed that this would happen, is when you strip away the need to use linguistics and mathematics to navigate through a software, you actually democratize greatly the ability for other people in the organization to get involved. And by nature, you would think, okay, I give this tool to a designer and he's just going to blow it away. But designers have been trained over, let's say, the younger designers over 5 years of education, and the older designers, 25 years of industry experience to sketch on 2D, to actually use some sort of resting their hand or arm on a flat surface and use that force feedback. And when you give this tool to someone who isn't used to that, there is this hard kind of transition from moving from our normal ways of expressing ourselves creatively into this gestural way of expressing ourselves, which inherently we have the kinesthetic knowledge and the spatial knowledge. I mean, we have that as humans. We move through a 3D world, but you may not be able to connect those two dots together on your creative side. And what we found is that some of the engineers and some of the clay modelers who are actually working with 3D problems every single day, and not only behind a screen, they actually just take to it straight away, and they'll actually be offering really credible designs and solutions to problems. So it becomes this 3D problem-solving session, and I feel like what was missing before was just their voice in the earlier stages of the process, where a design would get pushed through, but then they'd have to be the bearers of bad news, and that's where the friction started to bubble up between designers and engineers. Was an engineer saying, "You can't do that. It's impossible to make this." But by having those conversations very early on and giving tools to people to express themselves in 3D spatially from the onset, it's really brought those teams together a little bit tighter. And so that's been the most surprising and interesting part of this journey so far.
Great, thank you. So, Courtney, I was thinking about, I was you and I met at Tribeca when you launched the project 2 years ago, and you really what you're working on is so important. It was important 2 years ago. It's incredibly important with what we're seeing with protests in every single state in the United States today, and 18 countries around the world. And the recognition of the Black Lives Matter movement, the recognition of the problem of police brutality that we have in this country and potentially other countries as well. And the work that you did and the way that you led on that is so critical. So thank you for what you've been doing and what you continue to do. I'm wondering from your point of view as a professor at Columbia, and that your work was seen at Tribeca, and you've been working with other universities and colleges and institutions and organizations. I know you worked together with Stanford, but how does this make working it with virtual reality, working on this project, working on this really really important subject matter, that where so much work needs to be done. How does this have you thinking about the future of education and where we're taking education in our country and around the world?
Yeah, I've spent a lot of time. Thank you for that. And I've been spending a lot of time thinking about, as I mentioned in my comments earlier, about access to creating in the space and having non-technologists, if you want to use that phrase, think about how to leverage the technology. So in addition to integrating the VR that we created into various curricula at different levels, and again, thinking about this as a training tool, I've recently just proposed a course that I would teach completely in virtual reality with social workers, and having social workers think about and understand how the technology could be problematic, how it could be a powerful tool for our practice and the work that we do, what types of content might they create, what do they need to understand about data and privacy and ethics related to VR. So part of my mission has been to bring as many voices to this space as possible, including the voices that we may not typically think of. Because if we're trying to not only think about ethical applications of these types of technologies, but think about how to be anti-racist and anti-oppressive, not further inequities that already exist in society, then we have to actively think about how to avoid those things. So integrating people who are working at the grassroots level and community, people who are working in social work and other aspects of social justice and thinking about positive social impact. I want to use my platform to try and get access and get the technology in their hands, but also to get those voices into tech spaces so that they are involved in earlier phases of the process to try and anticipate where some of those issues of inequity and oppression might emerge, so that you're thinking about a human-centered approach from people who actually study and understand and work with humans earlier in the tech development process, so that we can avoid some of the issues I think that are already emerging. So that's been my focus over the past several months.
Great, thank you. And about thinking about virtual reality today in this time of physical distancing and social distancing, how has that impacted your work today, Carrie?
Yeah, it's a great question. Most of the groups that we work with have immersive learning labs. So they have equipment that's at their office, at their academic campus. And so as social distancing went into place and everyone went home, a lot of that shared use of headsets really was not an option. And so we're seeing people coming back to work and thinking about that in different ways. But one of the things we've built is a way to share an immersive experiences at a distance, and through basically streaming an embodied experience with a guided trainer, you can still have the affordance of some of that immersion. So like if I were to put on this headset, and then we were all able to join in and hear and see what I was seeing, but also see what the trainer is doing and how they're interacting. In a couple of our first case studies with some of the nursing schools we work with, has shown to be also a very powerful blended learning tool. But more and more, I think we're seeing why having eventually it's going to take several years to get to a one-to-one model of having everyone with a headset in their home. But you can start to see why that would open up possibilities for learning. And I think being able to work with groups that are saying, we're not going to go back to work like we were, but we still are going to have to do some of our training in person. There just will be things that we can't eliminate from the way we train. I think trying to figure out how that steps into the future of VR being more accessible by everyone is going to be really important.
Great. How about you, Shay? Are you seeing more interest in the platform during this time of physical distancing?
Yeah, it's been a pretty big rush to the platform from some of our customers in the sense of now they want to work remotely. So can we actually start to deploy some of our remote collaboration tools off-site? So we were working a lot with on-site in terms of setting up with their intranet, and now we're working with like cloud solutions to allow them to collaborate from home. And it's been really interesting because we've actually been jumping in and doing virtual training sessions and having discussions in some of our meetings in virtual reality from like moving from like WebEx or whatever the other platform we would use at the time into this platform. And we have like much richer discussions, and we're actually able to kind of like get a better sense of some of the problems that they're outlining. So it's been a nice transition for us. It's unfortunate circumstances, of course, but it's also something that's helping accelerate this idea that we've already been talking about for many years of a way for you guys to stay connected around the globe. If you have studios in Japan and studios in California, how do you guys collaborate? And you send these heavy packets of data back and forth, and nothing ever happens in real time. So it's kind of triggered and pushed forward for this real-time collaboration remotely, and hopefully that will change the industry. It would lower the carbon footprint for a lot of these companies as well as remove the need for physical models.
Great. Okay, so we're coming to the end of our sessions. There's two, and then we'll be heading into Q&A. So you'll be able to ask everyone some questions. So, there's two last parts I wanted to talk about. One, the theme of the conference is called Summit and Festival of Breakthrough Tech and AI. How do we get the next 10 years right? So pretty big question. So want to do a roundtable around, are you using AI today in your product? And more broadly, how do we get the next 10 years right? How are you working towards that? And then also, please let everyone know the best way to get in touch with you, and if they want to engage with your content or your product, where do they find it? Okay, let's start with you, Carrie.
Okay, so the next 10 years, how do we get those right? And then how am I using AI? I think one of the most important things to do is to build what's evergreen. So trying to think about how people ideally use this technology, and as best we can ignore the headset today and think about like, what do we build for the future? So building for voice, gaze, and gesture experiences, seeing it more inclusive design. So like in our case, a lot of the people that use our training are more women than men. And so really making sure that our headsets are built for lots of different kinds of people, starting to really tackle how people feel in the headset physically, and then building experiences that can really track performance seamlessly, so that we're capturing what people learn and what that value of the experience is, not just through like heat maps of where they're looking, but translating that into this value-based metric that says, Why do I care? How does that help my customer or my end user better understand something about themselves and their work that they didn't know otherwise? So really trying to imagine the things we want to see now, multiplayer engagement, deployments that can happen at an enterprise scale with large groups using and interacting in trainings together. And I know we're short on time here, so I'll just wrap up and say, if you'd like to get in touch with me, Carrie at embodiedlabs.com. That's our website as well, where you can learn more about how to use the product in your organization.
Great. So I know we're running out. I think we'll answer the bigger questions in the Q&A, but let's just go around and tell people how they can get in touch with you and find your content or product. Courtney.
At Courtney Cogburn on Twitter. First and last name at Twitter.
Yeah, Oluwaseyi Sosanya on LinkedIn and gravitysketch.com. You could reach us there.
Great. And I'm Joanna Popper from HP. I'm at Joanna Popper on Twitter and Instagram, and you can find me on LinkedIn. And now we're going to head to Q&A and keep talking about these really important topics. But thank you all for being on the panel. Thank you all for tuning in, and we look forward to the Q&A.
Want access to more CogX videos? Subscribe now for free at cogx.co.